talking about porn can be tricky. That's why we created an interactive conversation guide called Let's Talk About Porn. Simply select who you'd like to talk to, your partner, child, friends, parents, or even a stranger, and select the type of conversation you'd like to have. We'll walk you through a healthy way to approach this taboo topic in a productive conversation. Let's Talk About Porn is available for free, both in English and Spanish, so you can be prepared to talk when someone asks why you're listening to a podcast about the harms of porn. Access the guide and start talking at ftnd.org/blueprint. That's ftnd.org/blueprint.
What's up, people? My name is Garrett Johnson, and you're listening to Consider Before Consuming, a podcast by Fight the New Drug. And in case you're new here, Fight the New Drug is a non-religious and non-legislative organization that exists to provide individuals the opportunity to make an informed decision regarding pornography by raising awareness on its harmful effects using only science facts and personal accounts. We want these conversations to be educational, uplifting, and hopeful. As we sit down with experts, influencers, activists, and people with personal accounts, we cover a wide variety of topics that may be triggering to some. You can refer to the episode notes for a specific trigger warning. Listener discretion is advised. Today's episode is with Matthias J. Barker. He's all about helping people move towards what's meaningful in the midst of hardship. And yes, I stole that line from his Instagram bio, but it's the truth. And he's really, really good at what he does. His clinical practice is in Spokane, Washington, and he specializes in treating childhood trauma and marital issues. But most people know of Matthias from TikTok, where his videos have recently become very popular, and I mean very popular. He went from about 1,000 followers on TikTok to over 2 million followers in what seems like overnight. During this conversation, we talk about unwanted porn consumption and betrayal trauma. He gives some fantastic insight that I know will help so many. With that being said, let's jump into the conversation. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Consider Before Consuming. Well, we are excited to have you on the podcast with us today. Thanks for joining us. As we prepared for the conversation, I went through your YouTube video titled If You're Struggling with Porn. And I went through the 125 comments, and I saw many people expressing gratitude to you for changing the conversation about porn in a healthy way. And we at Fight the New Drug, we feel the same way. We are grateful for what you are doing. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm excited to talk. I appreciate you reaching out.
Yeah, absolutely. And we appreciate your time. So my first question kind of comes with a joke. So hopefully you're ready for a joke here.
Yeah.
I think that you should change your TikTok name, your TikTok handle to The Break because you broke the algorithm.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah, a little bit.
But I guess the first question is like, how'd you do it? How'd you break the algorithm, the TikTok algorithm?
Gosh, I don't know. I think if I knew that, I'd be super rich. I think I'm just trying to just keep doing my thing. Yeah, it's kind of taken off lately. It's kind of strange.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Honestly, I think that you could potentially have like 3 accounts, one for your hair, one for your lighting, and one for your thoughts. Maybe even a 4th one for your lamp. Like, yeah. And then you combine all those things, and it's just a great vibe.
Oh, thanks, man. Yeah, it was weird kind of getting on TikTok. Just originally, I don't know. There's not a lot of therapists doing stuff on TikTok trying to talk about deep stuff, and there's a lot of, I don't know, like what I watch on TikTok is just like skateboard fails and cooking videos and I don't know, just comedians, like, and so it was a space that it wasn't really like intuitive to be like, oh, I should go talk about like deep stuff and I don't know, meaning and hardship and trauma and pornography and like that wasn't my first thought, but I think getting on there, it was just kind of evident that with every new medium, kind of with every new space, it draws different people, and then it also maybe brings about different kinds of conversations. And so it was kind of a fun exercise to be like, hey, what if we try to talk about something meaningful in like 1 minute? And and I did my best, and it turns out that yeah, I guess it's working, and in the
That's
sense
cool.
that lots of people are engaging in conversation, and it's been really meaningful to be a part of. It's cool. Yeah, I love it.
Yeah,
It's been
it
a
is
fun year.
really cool. So how did you become a licensed therapist? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah. I well, so I went to school and graduated with my master's in clinical mental health counseling, and I right now am licensed as a clinical mental health associate, which means that I'm working on hours. You have to have 3,000 hours of counseling before they let you off on your own and stop kind of reading over your notes and making sure that, I don't know, you're not saying anything too crazy to people, which is good, you know, a little bit of oversight there. So I have my hours complete. I'm just needing to take some board tests and all that, and then I'm fully off on my own and hanging up my shingle, and I don't know, just I guess the next step in career. So yeah, licensed counselor. Did a lot of training with kind of various, I don't know, various different experts in the field, specifically even around sexuality. So like a specialty of mine is in sexual trauma recovery and childhood sexual trauma. And so pornography is very much kind of adjacent to that conversation, because that's a huge way that people try to process what's happened to them in trauma, and not even just in trauma, just generally, I think just kind of being raised in our current kind of media culture, sexuality questions around sexuality are very much intertwined into pornography as a way to explore and understand who we are and how we connect with people. So,
Right.
yeah, so that's kind of what maybe drew me into that topic. It's a big part of my training, big part of my clinical practice.
Right.
And then social media world has made that all pretty interesting as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you've worked hard for your dream job, and then I found out today that you officially quit your job. Is that
Yeah.
true?
Yeah. I just actually today is my last day at my office. I'm moving out of my office today, so I have this nice, pretty background behind us for one more day, and then I don't know. I have to find a corner in my house that looks okay, I suppose, to keep doing videos until I get into my new office. But yeah, I've been a part of a group practice for a while, and the group practice is great. It's kind of designed for clinicians who just got out of school, kind of setting up their careers, and it's kind of meant to be a stepping stone when it's appropriate off into your own thing. And so I think with TikTok and social media and everything that kind of blew up, it was like I have something like 6,000 people on my wait list. So I was like, well, I guess that's enough job security to go off on my own. So
Yeah.
I think I'll start my own thing. So I've been
Exciting.
kind of nervous to take that step, but it feels right.
Nice.
So,
That's exciting.
yeah.
Are you going to take the lamp with you?
I am. It's,
You need it. You need to. It's like part of your vibe.
It's my brand, is this tripod lamp. I have actually had people make videos on TikTok and stuff being like, I got the Matthias J. Barker lamp, and they're super stoked. They do unboxing videos.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And it's just a cheesy lamp from Target. It was like $20. I don't know.
All right. And this episode is brought to you by Target.
Yeah, exactly.
No, just joking. Well, as we go into the conversation, I wanted to first ask regarding therapy in general.
Mm.
I have an opinion on maybe some misconceptions that those coming to therapy might have, but I wanted to get your take. Like, maybe what are some misconceptions that people might have about therapy, generally speaking?
Just generally, just kind of.
Yeah, and maybe not specific to pornography, but just the average person that comes to therapy, because I think a portion of our listeners are going to be either a portion of them are going to therapy and a portion of them are considering therapy. And as they come to a therapist, what are some misconceptions that you think are common?
I think people are worried they're going to be judged and just kind of have a total stranger in the nitty gritty of their personal life. And I think that's just vulnerable. Like, I think it doesn't surprise me that people are worried about that. I would be worried about that. Like, even part of my personal stories, I never actually went to counseling before deciding to be a counselor. Like, my first time in counseling was like halfway through my master's program because they mandated it. And I was like, I do not want to go to counseling. They're like, why? And I'm like, because that sounds awful. And they're like, you know, the irony of your situation. And I'm like, fine, I'll go.
Oh, that's funny.
It's vulnerable. You're like, I don't know who this person is and what they're going to think about me or what they, and it's not like I share all that personal, vulnerable stuff with just anybody. maybe nobody. Maybe there's people listening where like the actual complex problems that you're facing, like the hardest things that you can't figure out, the things you've been racking your brain to try to get some resolution on, you've never shared with anyone, not your spouse, not your mom, not your best friend. Like you have this whole world that's just in your own head, and it's chaos. It feels like a swarm of bees, just like circling you always. And so I think what therapy is, and maybe this is what got me to go. So this is my pitch to people is you're just paying somebody to be completely like non-biased and not like involved in your world. They're not going to gossip. They're not going to tell your friends about, or, talk behind your back. They're not going to do anything. It's totally confidential. It's just this almost like blank space where you can go in and just get someone's honest opinion about the thing that you're going through. And that opinion is informed by clinical science, by the psychological sciences that they've studied. And then they're going to bring you through kind of a regimen, not through of just their own like life experiences necessarily. Some therapists design it like that, but ideally you're walking through clinically vetted interventions that have been shown to be helpful depending on the kinds of problems that you've been facing. And so it's I don't know, maybe that's kind of a cold analysis of what therapy can be. Is like you can go in, if you want that, if that's appealing, you can go in and really kind of find somebody that's looking just to be honest and to bring the data that they've mined and that they've studied and they've been trained into the table. And it's like both of you have these tools and you're trying to kind of work together to figure out the problems that you're facing. Maybe another way to look at it, and other therapists kind of organize it this way, would be kind of like a personally compassionate, kind, and safe space. If you feel just like really fragile and maybe you just don't have someone in your life that would compassionately just listen and try to hear what's going on in your world and not I don't know, criticize you for it.
Yeah.
And then maybe it's less, there's therapists that focus less on the problem solving features of it all, and they just want to create a safe space for you to talk and process and think, and where you don't feel like you have to live up to their expectations or anything. So it can be really useful in that way.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that one of the misconceptions that might be common is that therapy is going to feel enjoyable all the time. Yeah. You get that scene of like a person laid back on the couch, like eating some chocolates, and the therapist is just listening. I don't know, that misconception that it's going to be enjoyable, but I think your misconceptions, I like your misconceptions better.
Well, I mean, maybe we all kind of grew up watching like Robin Williams and Good Will Hunting, just this really warm, kind of funny, charismatic counselor. And then I don't know, we're going to get in there and it's going to be like our second dad and it'll be great and help us solve all the problems. Cause that's on the flip side, right? The flip side is the misconception is if I go in there, they'll fix me. If I go in there, I'm going to talk to the sensei, at the top of the mountain with all the answers.
Some type of magic is going to happen.
Yeah. And I'm going to process whatever I need to process, and then everything will feel okay again. And then that can be a letdown too, because you get in there and the problems are still ever present, and maybe you learn ways of thinking and tackling it different, but the work is still got to hike up,
right?
All the same. Yeah.
Right. Well, jumping into the conversation about pornography, I kind of wanted to split the conversation up into two parts. The first portion was talking about unwanted porn consumption or problematic porn consumption. And then the other portion was talking about betrayal trauma. And so starting off with like the unwanted porn consumption portion or the problematic porn consumption portion, on your YouTube video titled "If You're Struggling with Porn," during that video, you expressed that one important question to ask is, what are you searching for? Mm-hmm. And I liked that question a lot. And so I wanted to ask you, can you talk to that a little bit more? Like, what did you mean by that? And why is it important for an individual who is experiencing unwanted porn consumption to ask themselves, like, what are you searching for?
Yeah. Well, I think, I kind of set up the conversation on pornography as porn is like a tool. Like we're trying to use it to solve something, to fix something. And it's not just a kind of a mundane form of entertainment. And maybe it starts that way. And I think that's why it's confusing, because I think for a lot of people, the relationship with pornography begins pretty young. And so when you're 9, 10, 11, whatever, when you first kind of come across pornography, or maybe in your teens, whatever, it can feel like pretty, you're not using it to solve anything. You don't even really have necessarily super heightened sexual desires, especially if you found it before puberty. Like, so it's not, you're not going to it for any sort of purpose. It almost just kind of found you. But then it's like pornography is kind of in your tool belt. And then as problems surface later in life, maybe you're just figuring out what it means to romantically connect with someone or find companionship, or you're trying to figure out your career and your place in the world. And you feel kind of incompetent and aimless, or you feel you didn't get into the college you wanted to get into. You didn't get the job interview. It didn't go the way you wanted to. So it's like you have all these problems, and then pornography is this highly sensational, highly potent ability to regulate your mood. And so you could think of that in the most basic way in two categories. I'll give you two psychological sounding words. One is arousal and valence. And I don't mean arousal necessarily in sexual arousal. So if you, there's your like physiological arousal of like how like intense you feel, or how settled and like calm you feel. And then valence is how positive or negative that sensation is. So you could think of, you have a heightened sense of arousal. So you're really high in intensity. And then you have a heightened high valence, which is highly positive. That would be something like exuberance, because, excitement, euphoria. So you feel really engaged, really intense, really positive, and we love that feeling. Cocaine will get you to that feeling. I don't know. You have this high, valence, high arousal. And then there's also, other emotional states. You have low valence, low arousal. That's something like depression. You feel really negative. You feel really like, dead and unmotivated. You feel lethargic. You feel useless, and that's really low. And so here's what's interesting: psychologically, pornography has this incredible ability to like change your valence rapidly and change your intensity rapidly. And so something like an orgasm, something like viewing really explicit material that is hyper engaging, can move you from feeling lethargic and unmotivated and depressed, or whatever kind of criticisms you lay against yourself, maybe you feel useless or incompetent or undesirable, and then literally within seconds, it can just shift your valence and shift your arousal immediately. And so it's a really cool tool in that sense that it can do that. And there's few things on the planet that do that efficiently and you have access to something that does it. Because like I said, cocaine will do that, but that's expensive. And so, like, how do I adjust how I'm feeling? That's a really important question to understand. And can you shift your arousal and your valence? Can you change your mood when you're feeling unmotivated, when you're feeling lethargic, when you're feeling discouraged? Like not even in some sort of like a self-deprecating way, but just like you're going through a hard time. Do you know how to comfort yourself? Do you know how to move yourself into a place of peace, into a place of contentment? Do you know how to move yourself into a place of exuberance and feeling engaged and like you're participating in something meaningful in your life? Can you find that companionship and engagement with good friends? Maybe with a lover. Like, can you do that without using that tool? That's usually the question that's the crossroad that I find people in counseling, because typically what happens when someone comes in for porn dependence or unwanted porn consumption is like, I don't know, this is a presence in my life that I don't like. I don't like that I have to depend on this tool to do this thing.
Yeah.
Like, I want to be able to enjoy my marriage or enjoy my relationship or date or, figure out my trauma, figure out my career without needing this tool to do it.
Right.
And that's a pretty profound place to be in. So that's kind of maybe the context for that idea. It's like, what are you searching for is really like, what are the domains of life that you wish you had more flexibility, more freedom in, that you feel dependent on porn in order to enable you to experience?
I like that. I think in psychology, by the way, do you feel like, I think that watching your YouTube videos or your TikToks, I'm able to push pause and like think about the statement. And during like a live conversation, and also maybe like in a therapy session type setting for you and one of your patients, I'm just wondering if there's like, you have patients that are like, okay, pause. I need my moleskin. I need time to like process all the great information that you're giving me.
Yeah, that can happen.
But moving on to my question, the question was, in like Psychology 101, you're going to learn about defense mechanisms. And one of those is denial. And, I'm wondering, you're talking about turning to pornography as a tool whether you're experiencing all the like negativity or feeling down or sad or rejected, all these things. As people sidestep the problem and aren't addressing the problem in their life, and they're turning to pornography as a tool, do you think that there's a correlation between increased depression and sidestepping their problem and moving towards escapism through pornography?
That's a great question. I think I would frame that as the effect of shame. And so let's say, like, shame is always present in relation to a counterpoint of aspiration or a dream or something that you want to aspire to, right? So you have this goal for yourself. I'd like to be in a really rich and fulfilling relationship with a woman or a man that I like, and I want that. And then so there's this shame element of, I've been single for like 5 years, because you have this aspiration that creates a counterpoint of shame. It's two sides of a coin. Maybe you have an aspiration of really wanting to feel competent and like you're good at your job. You want to feel important and like essential in your job too, but you're working this job that completely sucks and they could replace you in like a day. You're pretty much just pushing buttons, or you're washing dishes, or you're punching things into a computer, and you feel like a robot could be doing this. And so you feel totally disengaged and useless in your job. And so that feeling of wanting to feel vital and important and essential, it creates a point of shame. And you feel like, why can't I get a different job? Or I've tried to get these other jobs, I've interviewed, or I'm just so lazy that I won't go look for another job. And we feel this pain, we feel this emotional distress in relation to the shame that we have. And notice, these aren't just sexual domains. So like, porn can be a tool to solve things that aren't just sexual. So we have this distress, and then that shame can produce this lethargic, depressed, unmotivated, highly self-critical state of mind, because that's kind of what happens when you punish yourself with self-deprecating thoughts and criticism. It's been shown in the data that we've known this for decades, is that the more self-critical you are, the less motivated you are. And people don't really think of it like that. Well, I just need to get my act together. I just need to like you said, denial. I think a lot of us can be self-critical at ourselves for being in denial. And that would actually lead us towards more denial. And right. So the shift, the adjustment in that space that I typically walk people through in treatment, in conversations like this, is let's understand the shadow. Let's understand that counterpoint of shame that is in relation to your aspiration. And instead of getting really self-deprecating and angry at ourselves for that shame, that's leading towards all this depression and all of this like kind of, it's adding to the cycle of all the dysfunction. Let's bring that into the light, and let's look at that. And maybe even have some compassion for yourself in that. Because maybe you didn't choose to, so let's say shame about pornography, so feeling shameful about, looking at porn, and you're in denial that it's even a problem. You're not even really bringing it up. No one even really knows that you look at it, whatever. Or, you're a spouse listening to this of someone who is looking at porn, and you feel a lot of shame personally for your spouse looking at porn. What does that mean about me? What does that mean? Does that mean I'm unattractive, or I'm not enough, for them? And so you have this huge counterpoint of shame. Let's bring that into the light and really approach it and understand it. Because when we do that, we can also start to capture and understand that dream, that counterpoint, that aspiration that's attached to that shame. And when both of those things are brought into integration, there's something meaningful there. And then again, moving towards that with compassion instead of criticism, that changes the whole map of how we're navigating this whole problem. It's less about doing something terrible and I need to stop, and I'm terrible for not stopping. And it's more about like, what do I need right now? What's going on in my life that is stressing me out? What are the ways that I'm trying to address that? What are the domains of life that I feel are going really well, and what are the ones that aren't feeling well? And why? Why do I feel like they're not going well? Why does working this useless job bother me? Why does me being single for 6 years bother me? Well, because I have a dream. I have a dream of finding companionship. I have a dream of doing something that I really care about. It's like, okay, so now we have the dream intact. So how do I go about pursuing that dream? Well, I could tell myself to get off my ass and like go do something about it. It's like, well, sure. Like you could berate yourself, but my guess is that you've been berating yourself for the past 6 years, and that hasn't really helped. Like maybe if you just berating yourself enough would get you up and moving, maybe that would have worked by now.
Right.
I don't know. Like maybe there's something else that we could try.
Right.
Maybe we get more tactile. We get more or tactical. I mean, we get more strategic. We bring kind of everything into the same place. We start looking at all these different components that are contributing to both the shame, the depression, the dream, the aspiration. And when all of that is put into view, and it takes a long time. Like even as I'm talking about this, you might be listening and feeling this is really like kind of esoteric and conceptual and heady. Because I don't know, I'm trying to like bring like a year of counseling into like
into a little conversation. Yeah.
Yeah. But it's, but at least maybe that would feel like a roadmap. Because I think what is really discouraging in a place where you're hyper shameful about a habit that you can't seem to break is like, I don't even know where to go from there. I think I've tried everything. And so even just hearing that there's another way, even if it sounds kind of complicated, I found that encouraging those times.
It kind of reminds me of that equation that happiness equals reality minus expectations. And it seems like you're kind of talking to some of those expectations, like I should be in a relationship or I should have a meaningful job. And maybe the answer is perspective, like how we're looking at those expectations. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it too. I think that's, and it's not even necessarily that having those expectations is bad. It's the story we tell ourselves about not realizing those expectations. So for example, it's okay to want to have a really fulfilling, great job where you feel essential. It's okay to want to have like a great podcast that does well. It's okay to want to have be top salesman of the year, whatever. It's okay to want to do that. But the story we tell ourselves about the journey towards that goal is imperative. So if you tell yourself, oh, I've been doing this for a year and it's been completely pointless and it hasn't worked at all, that means I'm a failure. It's like the way you assess your success or failure in those domains, that's really important. And I think maybe in my opinion, like kind of a cheap fix is to say like, you're completely fine and you're completely like okay without achieving any of your goals. You're fine just the way you are, and that feels really good and it writes really well on like an Instagram tile or whatever. But I think deep down we know that like no, those dreams actually matter to us, and we want to realize them. The contaminant in that whole process is the criticism and the appraisal of our own failure and our own activity without maybe looking at the span of time and how things evolve over time. So for example, like I have a lot of I have a lot of therapists who have been in the field for a long time coming to me and just like, wow, Matthias, you blew up on TikTok. How cool for you. You have people engaging with your stuff. I would love to have people pay attention to my blog or, to my book. That would just be incredible. And I think that's a great aspiration. Like that's awesome. But that creates a counterpoint of shame because like I said, I just kind of started this gig. I graduated from school pretty recently and kind of working on my hours. And so there's lots of contempt that I've gotten from clinicians too, that such a young guy, kind of new in the field, has had so much success so quickly when there's people who have worked really hard, a lot longer, are way more smarter than me, that don't have the same attention. And when you look at kind of those things, again, with that idea of the shame and then the aspiration and the counterpoint, and then the story that we tell ourselves about that relation, I mean, it brings us to a point where we can see that if I am directly comparing myself and creating these expectations, not as, oh, I want to have someone meaningful engage with myself, but instead I want to be like Matthias, or to bring it down out of that example, just to something more, normal. Like I want to have a really meaningful job instead of I want to have a job like my buddy Derek from high school that seems to be like really rich right now and like, doing really good on all these different fronts on Instagram. Or,
right.
I've been 5 years single and a lot of my friends are married and they have kids right now. Like that's not fair. Like I want that. When we start to compare ourselves to other people's storylines, that's where the expectations go rogue. It's not bad to have a dream. It's bad to map our dream directly onto someone else's life and someone else's timeline and someone else's unique blend of struggles and opportunities. That's where it gets really kind of poisonous. And so,
right.
Like I like your phrase, like happiness and expectations. There's a relation there, but
right.
That might be overly.
It's almost like creation. The thing that I was thinking about as you were speaking is creation over comparison. And okay. I think we need to change the equation from happiness equals reality minus expectations. Maybe it's happiness equals reality plus expectations and plus like healthy perspective on those expectations. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're getting.
Well, that's a good summary. I like that.
Yeah. But you brought up shame. And, some of our listeners are going to be fighting shame, whether that is the person that has experienced some betrayal trauma or the person who has experienced problematic porn consumption.
Yeah.
And I've heard you say before that the opposite of humility is shame.
Okay.
And so I guess the opposite of that would be shame. The opposite of shame is humility. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah.
Since we're kind of on the subject of shame?
Yeah, that's a recapitulation of an idea from C.S. Lewis. So C.S. Lewis had a line where you just talk about like the opposite of pride isn't like this self-deprecating, shameful like anger towards yourself. It's self-forgetfulness. It's like the man who is humble isn't thinking of his lowly position. He's just not thinking about himself at all. Okay. And I liked that idea. I thought it was cool because it's we play by the same game when we put pride and shame in these polar opposite binaries, and we just say, okay, I shouldn't be prideful, I should be humble. And then what we mean by humble is like really self-deprecating, angry, self-critical, really hyper focusing on our faults. It's the same game. It's like there's this standard that I need to hit that makes me okay or not okay. And pride is being above the threshold of I'm hitting all my standards that I believe a successful person should be. And then I guess, quote unquote, fake humility would be I'm not hitting all the standards of the kind of person I think I should be. And then we beat ourselves up and harass ourselves for that. So humility is maybe this more open stance of like, I'm on progress towards the things that are meaningful to me and important to me. And I'm always kind of editing that. And there's some things in me that are insufficient, and that's fine, but that doesn't mean I'm not valuable as a person. That just means like I'm growing. And right. I always want to grow. Like it would be a bummer to get to a place where you're completely content and don't need growth anymore. That's just, I guess, ignorance. Like,
right.
Growth though isn't just turning all these muddy, terrible parts of yourself into something worthwhile. It's expanding the good parts of you so they take up more and more space. Like, and maturing the parts of you that aren't sufficient yet, because typically those things are just like dull versions of something very sharp and something actually very useful in the world. Like I'm a pretty impulsive person by nature. I don't know. I'm extroverted. I'm kind of like spontaneous and creative, and I'm the kid who was like distracting you in math class because I was like throwing like paper darts or like I make these little paper darts like where you put a piece of gum and a tack and a paper dart and you throw it up against the ceiling and the tack would stick to the styrofoam, and that's what I'd be doing all math class when the teacher had their back turned, and I'd see how many darts I could get to stick to the ceiling before the teacher would notice. And
man.
Usually get to like 13 or 14 and then I get lunch detention. Like that's me. So I'm really I don't know, kind of scattered in that way. But like that's not a bad thing. It's not a fault. It's just a dull version of something sharp. And that impulsivity, within maturity and within time, I've really worked to try to shape that into courage to take risks and to enter that most people wouldn't have entered.
I like that.
So
I think your TikTok
guy for that reason. Yeah.
I was going to say, I think your TikTok is an example of that. So I totally agree.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I think of faults and shame and aspiration and humility in those spaces. It's kind of rambling, but yeah, that's what I think.
I like that. During your YouTube video, if you're struggling with porn, you said, what's the most optimal environment for sexual expression?
Yeah.
And what are the ways that we mitigate the negatives and promote the positives?
Mm-hmm.
And if you can you talk to that a little bit more?
Yeah, sure. And so that video, I mean, this is a pretty common thing, even outside of conversations around sexuality. It's like you have to form kind of a philosophy of life around what you think leads to your flourishing and the flourishing of people around you, and what leads to like negative outcomes and suffering for you and other people around you. And then commit yourself to the patterns of behavior that are going to bring about the best outcomes. So we call that values or morals. That's what a moral is. Like that's what the whole study of morality is. And even like in religious cultures, or, when we start to talk about shame or morals, it gets kind of muddy because we just have so many experiences, maybe growing up with religion or church, or where it felt really, I don't know, kind of oppressive. But genuinely, I think what people are trying to get at are what are the patterns of behavior that lead to flourishing. And that's a moral is a summary of that spanned over a long period of time. And so when, even in that video, what I was talking about was like, create a sexual ethic. You can create whatever one you want, like, but make it consistent. Because if you're just going off your mood, that is like that is a compass that is switching its north constantly. Like, it's just not a very efficacious strategy to just go off of what you feel in the moment and what mood you're in, because your mood is impacted by so many things, like what you ate last night, how much sleep you got, like if you're feeling good about your job, if you just got out of a conversation with your boss where you're worried if he's going to fire you, like your mood is fluctuating like mad. Don't purely go off your mood.
That makes
Have
sense.
like an ethic, have almost, it's like a filter, like a photo filter. You could think of it that way. Like, what's the filter you can put over a photo that's going to bring about the good parts? It's going to add contrast. It's going to add brightness or whatever. Like, what's your filter that no matter kind of the domains of life that present themselves to you, that are going to bring out the good and maybe minimize the bad?
Okay. Yeah.
So that you can move towards something better.
It's like that North Star. When we're feeling impulsive, it's like, stick to that. I like that.
Yeah. And so that was kind of the conversation around sexual ethics too. And I think people get nervous about that because that sounds kind of conservative or repressive or, but it's not. And I think everyone has an ethic, whether they're willing to vocalize it or not, whether it's concrete or not. So yeah, that was kind of my point in that video.
And I think part of it too is like adapting and adjusting and pivoting when needed, right? It's like we have this perspective and we think that we have this solid perspective on it. And then we take that road and it turns out that actually that's not what we want, or that's not what we thought. And so I think it's important to be able to pivot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So well said. I agree 100%.
We've talked about shame. We've talked about a lot of things. And one of the questions that I have is this internal debate, like this internal monologue that can happen, especially with a person who is experiencing any type of unhealthy habit or a compulsive behavior. And I think it definitely takes place in a person experiencing unwanted porn consumption, where there is that internal monologue. And I think the thing is, like, we need to have compassion for ourselves. And at the same time, it's tough to do that sometimes. If you're counseling someone, how do you help them have a healthier internal monologue?
That's a great question. Maybe, I start by making a case for why compassion is a better strategy than lambasting yourself, because that's not an obvious thing. I think a lot of people are pretty suspicious of the self-love mumbo jumbo, and it falls flat pretty quick. And maybe that's not usually what I'm talking about, is whatever kind of bumper sticker self-helpy kind of self-love stuff that people kind of see online. I think what I mean by self-compassion is like a highly like rational and grounded and focused decision to focus on one's needs and the encouragement that one needs to make the decisions that are meaningful to them.
Okay.
And so that's in noticing the effects, highly pragmatic in that sense. So like we'll have let's say I'm having a conversation with someone who just looked at porn last night. They feel really terrible about it, and they're not sure if they should tell their spouse, and they're really worried that their spouse is going to get really frustrated and mad at them. It's like, okay, so walk me through the inner dialogue. Like, how are you appraising this situation? Tell me about what you're thinking right now. And they're like, well, I'm just such a screw up. I can't believe I did this again. I'm never going to change. I've been struggling with this for years, and I just feel like giving up. And I don't know, something just overtakes me that I feel like I have to. I feel like I need to look at that. And it's like I don't have any control over that. So what kind of pathetic piece of garbage am I that I can't just like have some basic self-control to not do that? Like I'm supposed to be this husband. I'm supposed to be a father. I'm supposed to be a mother. I'm supposed to be, somebody who is this upstanding person, but I'm not. I'm this garbage, trash, yada, yada, yada. So they'll go down this self-deprecating line of thought. And then I'll pause and instead of trying to argue with that, no, you're not. Like, have some love for yourself. Like I'll say, what do you notice right now? What do you notice just in your body? Do you feel like more motivated to like step into the decisions that you feel like are good for you? And I bet you feel super motivated right now. It's like not look at porn again, right? You feel awesome. And you're like, what? No. I'm like, how do you feel right now? And they say that I feel deflated. I feel like crap. And I'm like, okay, so is feeling like crap something that you think will make you really motivated to next time not look? Or do you feel like that actually drains your emotional energy? It drains your mental resources to be able to focus in the moment. And I'm like, I feel more drained. I'm like, right. It's like, okay, so that storyline is going to occur to you. I don't have any psychological skills to like make that never occur to you. It's kind of like a group text. Like when you're hopped on a group text and people are just texting over and over, it's like 10 at night and you're like, stop texting me. You're like, why do you do that? But you have a choice to answer the group text and try to convince everyone to stop texting you, or to let your phone just buzz and go back to sleep. That there's a pivot there, like you said. There's a shift that can happen. Or you're going to notice these self-deprecating thoughts, but are you going to attach to those thoughts? Are you going to, answer that group text and argue with everyone until everyone shuts up, and then consequently get wrapped into the conversation and kind of, I don't know, feel more and more drained? And then it's like 12:30 at night and you've been arguing with your friends for 2 hours to stop texting you so you can sleep, but ironically enough, you haven't slept all night. Or is there a place where you can just pivot away from that conversation and focus on something else? Like maybe it makes sense right now that you'd be struggling with this. And not in a way to excuse you, not saying like, oh, it's fine, like do whatever you want. I'm just saying, but maybe it makes sense. Like maybe you didn't choose when you were 9 to find that magazine or that pop-up. Maybe you didn't consent to that fully. And then maybe you didn't really even know what you were struggling with or what you were even dealing with when you were engaging in that 12, 13, 14, 15. Maybe you didn't know. Maybe you didn't know that relationship with that person was going to lead you down some sexual escapade that ended in a lot of unhealthy sexual behaviors that then you brought into future relationships, and that created all of this dysfunction and insecurity. Like maybe you just didn't know at the beginning. And so it makes sense that this is kind of complex to figure out. And it would feel simple, like just don't do it. But maybe it's not that simple. Maybe that theory hasn't been very helpful in you trying to solve this problem. And then the question moves to like, well, what would be encouraging? What would be supportive? What would help? And that's a really vulnerable question to ask, because you're like, well, what would help is for me to get off my butt and da-da-da. Like, no. Like, I didn't say what should you do. I said, what would help? And it's like, the mind almost like kind of shorts out for a second, because you're wrapped in that text conversation of the self-criticism, and I'm asking you to engage in a completely different conversation. Like, what do you need? Well, I need my spouse to have more sex with me. No, like that's too simple. Keep going, keep digging. Maybe you need to feel respected. Maybe you need to feel delighted in. Maybe you're looking at that porn that shows someone who's exuberantly enthusiastic to see you and desires to serve you, because deeper than just like an orgasm or certain body parts that turn you on, maybe it's the desire to actually feel like you fit and that you matter to someone, like on a deep level. Well, maybe if my spouse would just lose weight, then yada, yada, yada. Too simple.
Right.
It's deeper than that. Like if it was just that, you wouldn't be having such a hard time with this. Like there's these kind of false answers that we tag on to, like when it comes to what are our needs. But when we actually start to look down at the deep emotional needs, the things in us that feel really unfulfilled, and I'm naming very like masculine centered things here, like feeling competent, feeling like you have a place, feeling respected. But that's the same for women too. Can solve the same kinds of things with pornography within an emotional need. So it's complex. It's different for every person, but that's maybe an overview of the path of self-criticism.
Yeah, I like that. That helps a lot. Yeah, I couldn't help but think about your analogy on one of your recent videos with the fish hooks, and like trying to move away from those fish hooks. That's when those sink deeper. Mm-hmm. And so I think that kind of aligns with what you just said. And
I had an analogy where I talk about those thoughts, kind of like the text thread analogy. It's similar, where like those thoughts occur to you and they're kind of like fish hooks in the water, and you're a fish swimming down the river. And there's a big difference between noticing a fish hook and keep swimming, and grabbing onto a fish hook and fighting against it and pulling away. And that actually makes the fish hook sink deeper and deeper into your psyche, and makes it hard to, I don't know, you get all tangled up. You can't just keep swimming. Right. And I think a lot of us feel like, okay, the mission is to get the fish hooks out of the water. The mission is to get everyone to stop talking. The mission is to not feel bad anymore. The mission is to not feel the desire for porn anymore. No. The mission is to experience all those things, but then be able to make a decision that's in line with your values. And that goes for how you behave, but also the engaged conversations in your own mind. And that's possible. It takes a lot of time. That pivot is really hard. You know, I have a little girl. We just had a little girl, 2 months old right now. And so we've been hanging out with a lot of our parent friends a lot recently. And we have another friend who has a little toddler, and this little toddler is learning to walk like, I don't know, year and a half, something like that. And she's falling down constantly. And I read actually somewhere, I think this is it was in Stephen Hayes' book, where he's talking about just like a pivot, a toddler will fall down 10,000 times learning how to pivot, learning how to shift her weight on the ball of her heel from left to right or right to left.
Oh, wow.
A toddler will fall down 10,000 times to learn how to do that.
Wow.
You and I will do that easy. You and I can just pivot without even thinking.
Right.
For a toddler, over and over and over and over and over, they'll fall down. And a lot of us have this expectation that if it really just mattered enough to me, I would just stop. And I'm like, I don't know. Every other pivot that you've learned in your life might have taken you thousands of times and tries.
Right. That's wild. Cool. That's cool. Yeah, that kind of reminds me of Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours, like the rule of 10,000 hours. It's 10,000 pivots. We need 10,000 pivots before we become an expert.
Yeah, that's good.
What about, and I don't want to ask for specific advice because I know that's, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that's kind of what you do. And maybe that's a misconception about therapy. But I think there are a significant amount of listeners who are experiencing unwanted porn consumption, and they have a significant other where in a romantic relationship, but they haven't engaged in openness and self-disclosure with that individual. And they're hesitant to do so because of fear and all of the other possible things that go into opening up. Do you have any, I don't want to say advice, but I guess, do you have any tips or any thoughts on that?
It's highly context dependent on the how, right? So I wouldn't want anyone to hear me say like, oh, you should be honest, and then think that means I just need to, I don't know, go about it with no strategy or without any tact. So to take this with a grain of salt for people listening, but there's this idea that I learned from Jordan Peterson that was just honesty. When you're honest, the best outcomes come about, even if it's a disaster. Even if when you're honest, a disaster comes about, that disaster in the moment is actually a better outcome than maintaining the lie, because the lie is likely to bring a worse disaster down the road. Does that make sense?
So it's just delaying the disaster.
Yeah, and it's compounding it.
Oh, and compounding it. Yeah, that makes sense.
You know, it's and I've never seen that to not be true. I've watched in hundreds of people's lives, thousands of counseling hours, people decide to be dishonest, and for good reasons. Like if they were honest, they'd lose their job. If they'd honest, their son may never talk to them again. If they were honest, their spouse would leave them. Great reasons. But I've also watched that dishonesty completely compound and create disasters that no one could have predicted. And you'd think that holding a secret away from someone you love, because and maybe you have a good reason, because you don't want to hurt them, you don't want them to suffer, and maybe they wouldn't suffer if they didn't know. It's just I don't know, I guess this is kind of an advice because I can't prove this. I don't have a study to show you. It's a philosophy of mine, I guess. I think that'll end in their long-term suffering, in your long-term suffering.
Yeah.
And I see that, and I believe that, maybe out of anecdotes, out of the people I've seen, but that's a moral belief of mine. I should say, like, the pattern of behavior that I think leads to flourishing is be honest, even when it costs you everything, because that outcome, even if it's a disaster, is the most optimal outcome, versus the outcome that you think you can control by deceit and lying and hiding in the shadows. And it's a false sense of security. Now, that being said, that doesn't mean, like I said at the beginning, the how is really, really important here. And I think that's best kind of sorted out with a mentor, with a therapist, with, I don't know, if you're part of a faith community. Like, if you have someone you trust, work that out, because there's ways to approach that. Because the story that we tell ourselves, like I was saying earlier, the story that we tell ourselves about these things are really, really impactful. I think I see a lot of people rushing really quickly to the idea that they're a sex addict and they're this horrible, wretched person that's contributing to, human trafficking in the market that's like creating, suffering for millions of people all over the world. And they have deep, deep, deep self-deprecating shame. And they're going to present that to their partners. I'm this horrible, terrible, awful person. And maybe that's actually not the best place to start. Maybe you need to go to therapy, work some of this out, work some of that shame out. And then you come to your partner with a little bit of understanding about, okay, hey, I've been viewing pornography the past several years and I haven't told you, and I've been dishonest, and I'm so sorry. I think I've been doing that for a few different reasons. And these aren't excuses. These aren't like, doesn't make it okay. I'm just telling you what's been contributing to it. Since we've had kids, it's been really hard to connect. My job is really stuck, whatever it is. And I'm like, I think part of my recovery and taking ownership and responsibility for this habit that I've done, this dishonesty that I've perpetrated, is addressing both my personal porn habit and these domains of life that I feel like I need to be paying more attention to. And I need to be solving and working towards flourishing with more intentionality, not using porn as a tool to do that, but using other things as a tool to do that.
Yeah.
And when you bring that to your partner, that's a very different conversation, because it's less like, it is a betrayal, but there's a betrayal with a pathway to healing if they want to take it. And you can't guarantee if your partner's going to be up for that. But it's a step forward in intimacy when you do that, and it can be really comforting to. As comforting as you could hope. When a partner kind of learns that there's this big thing underneath the surface, but then to hear that you've actually taken some thought and accountability, and then you have a plan to move forward. It's a whole different emotional atmosphere than I look at porn all the time because I'm this terrible person and I have no idea what to do, and I'm probably going to keep looking at it. Right. For the next several months, because I have no infrastructure idea about how to change it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I liked what you said. You said a step forward in intimacy. And I think that sometimes to experience that step forward in intimacy, sometimes it's going to feel like it's a couple steps back. Like that initial honesty can feel like, oh man, our intimacy is becoming worse. But then over time and healing, that step forward seems, you start to realize that, that was a step forward.
And the reality is that you are actually it feels like, okay, telling them sets us 5 steps back. You were 5 steps back the whole time. She just didn't know. Or he didn't know.
Yeah.
That's the reality. It's like you had this huge chasm between the two of you and she didn't even know. How is he or she supposed to navigate you if they don't even, if they don't know there's a huge chasm between the two of you? Right. How are you supposed to build an intimacy? How are you supposed to move towards what's meaningful together if you're so far apart?
Right.
And the reality is you are far apart, even though it doesn't feel like it, because you are in your own heart.
Yeah.
You're far apart. And that's actually, so that's why it's a step forward in intimacy. And you're totally right, because people are going to react to that in a litany of ways. And I have no guarantees or promises that that's actually going to resolve or make things better. It could end in disaster, telling them. But that disaster, again, and this is just a philosophy of life, so you can take it or leave it. That disaster is actually better than the long-term outcome of hiding it indefinitely.
Right. And I think your opinion, you said that that's one of your opinions, that addressing it now is going to be better than letting it compound. It doesn't only seem like an opinion to me. It seems like a justified belief, because I think that there's lots of examples and logic there. Moving into like the second portion of the conversation about betrayal trauma, one of the things that is a common phrase, they say, name it to tame it. And a portion of our listeners might not be very familiar with what betrayal trauma is. Can you talk to that a little bit? Describe what is a simple definition of betrayal trauma?
Yeah. I think what makes the betrayal traumatic when it comes to, okay, you just learned that your partner has had this huge secret that's been underneath for maybe your entire relationship, is you can think of it like you've been navigating your partner using a map. And on that map, there's certain mountains and there's fire hydrants and there's roads and there's ice cream stores, whatever. There's a whole map of roads and everything. And you've been using that map to navigate. And then it's like you learn and you find out that there was actually this huge rock structure in the middle of the map. And not only that, but you've been, all those times that you've, woken up and your car was like dented and scratched and beat up, that was because of that rock that you didn't even see. It's like you've been running into that rock over and over and over, and you've been racking your brain trying to figure out why am I running into this rock that's not even on the map? And then it like comes to light and you're like, oh, the map is drastically different than I thought it was. And then it's not that you're just rewriting the map in the present. It's like you're looking back on the past and wondering what was real and what was not real. And that's traumatic because that's your most intimate relationship that you have potentially. That's the safest place you had on earth potentially. And there was a contaminant in it. There was something unsafe. There was something that was directly opposed to you, depending on the story you tell yourself about that. Like there was something that that was a betrayal. And so the trauma from that comes from, okay, maybe my whole marriage was a lie. Maybe the intimacy that I felt with this person for a lie. The past 10 years of my life were a lie. The father of my kids, that whole story, that whole schema that I had in my head needs to be rewritten. The mother that I had to my kids is completely rewritten. And that you run to catastrophe. That's the first thought that comes to mind is you catastrophize. You generalize. That's what happens in trauma. So for example, like when you get bit by a snake, you're not just scared of garden snakes, from that point on. You're scared of all snakes going on.
Right.
We're not just scared of particular kinds of poisonous spiders. We're scared of all spiders, period.
Mm-hmm.
So we generalize. We find a domain of threat, and then we say, what is similar to that? And then all of that's bad, and then we try to get away from it. So psychologically, when you learn that your partner has been engaging in this betrayal of your trust, you generalize and you'd be like, I don't know which parts of you are stable and trustworthy and which ones are not. And if there was a big rock on the map here, if there was a contaminant here, are there contaminants in other places?
Oh, yeah.
Were you honest? Are there other things I should be worried about? Do you gamble? Did you sleep with somebody? Like there's a bunch of questions. And then you don't know which parts of the map are trustworthy or not. And so you don't know how to navigate the person at all.
Right.
Not just in that domain, in any domain. You change the password to your bank account because you don't know if they're spending. You just don't know.
Right.
They're uncharted territory to you completely. That's what psychologically happens. That's not the truth, but it's what psychologically happens.
Yeah.
So that's why I advise to maybe go into counseling, to maybe join a group, to do a little bit of research, to do some reading, to find accountability, so that when you present this idea to your partner that, hey, I've had something in the shadows that I need to bring to you, you can say, these are the parts of the map that we need to rewrite. Here's how I'm going to rewrite them. You can trust that these other parts of the map are still intact. And they can believe you or not, but at least that gives them more stable markers to go off of in that process of grieving, of reworking trust back to you.
Right.
Is having some markers, giving them, in a sense, a new map instead of just exposing that the old one is a fraud. And I hope that's not overly dramatic.
I like that.
That's kind of how I think.
That helps a lot. So I'm going to hit you with the tough question here.
Yeah.
And the tough question is that some people hold the opinion that porn consumption is a form of cheating, and others say that it's not. And so the question is, can porn become the other girl or the other guy in a relationship? Basically what I'm asking is, do you consider, or what is your opinion or thoughts on porn consumption being considered cheating?
Yeah, I think I let people decide that for themselves. And the reason I do that is because everyone has different symbolic significance to the idea of what an affair is or cheating is. And what I try to do is almost sidestep that question entirely and be like, okay, how did the cheating or the affair affect you? Or how did the porn habit affect you? Because that's the meat of it. It's like, I think what we're trying to do with that label is we're trying to decide, are you safe or not? Are you, can this be repaired or not? Do I have the social ability to leave you now if I feel like that's the right thing to do? And am I still socially credible in the eyes of my friends and people around me? That's the right question. So that's what I think people are trying to discover with the question of cheating or, an affair with porn is it's in part a social question. How does this choice that you've made or habit that you have impact how I stand socially in reference to you? Because I might decide that I don't want to continue to work your map, but I might want to go elsewhere. Does that mean is that a moral error in me, or am I morally permitted to do that? So that's kind of underneath that. And then second, like, how deep does this betrayal go? How seriously are we taking this? And that's why my advice of getting a little bit of insight, then bringing it to your partner with like kind of a roadmap of where you want to go from here. I'm going to go to this support group, full of dudes, maybe virtually or in person, where we talk about this every week. I'm reading these books. I'm in counseling. I'm putting blocks on the computer. I threw away my stash. I have 3 men or women that I've talked to that are checking in with me on a weekly basis, to be able to, you have a plan.
Yeah.
What you're doing there is you're saying like, here's the reasons why continuing on with me in this relationship or this marriage is still a good idea.
Yeah.
And is it cheating or not? Like, in my mind, it's almost irrelevant because even if it was an affair, you'd be asking these same questions. Even if it was him or her sleeping with somebody else, you still want to make a decision. Can I trust you or not? Can we rewrite this map to continue living life together in a way where I can trust you? It's the same question. So really, I think when people are hyper focused on, is this cheating? I think what people are trying to figure out is who's to blame, who's the bad guy, and where do I stand socially on the ramifications of this?
Right.
And I don't know. I think those are all valid questions, valid things you need to process, but not necessarily relevant to the actual task of rebuilding up trust. I would say if you're in a position where your partner feels like you cheated and you don't see it that way, the more defensive you get in that, the less likely it is to build back trust.
Yeah.
And you don't have to necessarily like own her or his vocabulary on that, but you should, the question to ask, and I was like, hey, you cheated. You're basically brought someone else into our home. Instead of, no, I didn't. Like, it wasn't actually cheating. It's different. It was on the internet. I don't even know them. Instead of going there, I'd be like, tell me how that affected you. Tell me how that makes you feel. And that's like the most vulnerable, terrible, like even hearing me say that, I was like, that's the last thing I would ask them. Well,
And also a beautiful thing.
Yeah, but that's the ticket. That's at the heart of it. How are you feeling? Tell me how that affects you. I would imagine that would make you feel so lonely and betrayed. Like, get at the heart, like sidestep that, because that's what you both are really after is can we repair this and get back to a place of healing?
Yeah.
That's how I take that.
I like that. As you were talking about the maps and things, I couldn't help but think about like the Maps app or other apps with the map. And it's like, if there's a glitch, then that company is going to go in and be like, what can we do better? What do we need to fix? The user experience is important. Anyway, just.
Yeah, no, that's actually a good expansion on that analogy. I might use that. That's cool. I like that.
Talking about betrayal trauma and someone who has experienced betrayal trauma, and for the person that feels like they've fallen out of love with their partner and they're feeling like they want to delete the Maps app and go to a new app or whatever, continuing with that analogy.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the person that they feel like they've fallen out of love, do you have advice for that individual or for that couple?
I think on the other side of all this, there's a lot of shame you can feel in feeling like I actually don't want to continue this relationship with this element in there. And like we talked about the shadow, kind of that shame and the aspiration, the shame and the dream. It's like sometimes we feel shame and wow, that's kind of a deal breaker for me. And that affects me so deeply and so deeply at my core. I'm filled with so much anger and resentment that I don't even want to look at them. And then we feel shameful about that. We see that response in our own heart, and then we get angry at that. But that actually needs to be brought to the table too. In the same place as the desire to maybe want to make this work. And because the dream, the aspiration is like lifelong companionship with someone you trust and that you love, maybe that you spent most of your life with, the mother or father to your kids, maybe. And the shame is maybe this revelation means that he doesn't care about me as much as I thought he did or she did. Maybe this means that, I don't know, especially in the case of maybe looking at pornography that is very, very different than the kind of person you are. So the kind of porn that they're into, maybe it's like gay porn, or maybe it's with a body type or a person that is very different than you. And so you're wondering, like, am I even what you want? Like, and that creates a world of complexity. I think that shame isn't going to be the thing that helps you sort these things out. It's compassion, and it makes sense. That's kind of maybe the point of it. It's like, yeah, it would make sense if someone was looking at porn and it was some body type that you would never be able to achieve, or a gender that you're not. It's like, well, where do I go from here? How would we even repair it? And I think that the step to take there isn't just for me to tell you to double down and be compassionate and just listen and work it out. It's actually like, it's okay if you're feeling really discouraged and like you don't want to continue in this relationship. It's all right.
That's part of genuineness, right?
It's real. It's the truth. We have this ideal that we'd be able to work it out. And especially in the case where you feel like your partner just isn't, like we talked about denial, they have no infrastructure or desire to actually change their behavior, and they're constantly lying and betraying and letting you down over and over and over and over with no real plan. And a plan meaning things like accountability, going to groups, porn blocks on their computer, going to therapy. If they're not willing to take even just these basic steps to like actually change their behavior, besides like wanting to, if your partner, the most that they're wanting to do is just like, well, I'm going to try really hard not to, because I really love you and I mean it this time. That's just not enough substance to really make a difference for some people. And I think that's appropriate. I think maybe in summary, what I'm saying is like, there's not a right answer to should I stay with them or not. And it's okay to feel really discouraged. And I think when we actually bring the prospect of maybe this means the relationship needs to part ways to the table, it's actually really clarifying. Oftentimes we're so even just devastatingly scared to even consider that we just keep it out of our view. And then we just express anger and resentment that they're not earning our trust back fast enough to ward off this fear of that maybe this isn't the right thing. And then that actually becomes really manipulative and kind of a trap, because it's like they're kind of enslaved to you now. And that's not what you want. You don't want a companion who's your servant. You want a companion who's your equal. Yeah. And so the decision needs to be made. Either you forgive and you set up boundaries and you create a plan to earn back trust, or you decide to part ways or create distance or separation for a season to really clarify how you want to move forward. And I think depending on the situation, both of those can be completely valid options. I don't know.
Context is important.
Context is important. It's hard to give a big blanket statement about that.
Well, again, I think we're kind of finishing up on the conversation about betrayal trauma. And you've kind of already talked to this, but I wanted to maybe get your opinion a little bit more on it. And it's that, there might be someone listening to this podcast that is in a situation where they have fallen out of love, but they're also trying to hold on and participate and be genuine. But I'm wondering if there are generally speaking, if there are some telltale signs of abusive relationships, like when a person should exit.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's so hard to answer out of context. I would say that if you don't feel safe, if you feel like at physical or sexual harm, that's a red flag. If they're demanding that you do things sexually that you're uncomfortable with or that hurt, and by demand, I don't just mean request, but like insistence to the point where you feel like you don't really have a way to say no. I'd say that's a red flag, and certainly, if you feel like it's creating an environment for your kids that isn't safe, like, I don't know, maybe they're viewing porn out in front of everybody, or they have a really sexual way of joking, and it's just kind of pervaded their person in a way where you don't feel it's a safe environment for your kids. That's a red flag. If it's mixed into a substance, like it's in conjunction with a dependence on alcohol or a drug, or it's creating unsafety, that's a red flag. And when I say red flag, that doesn't mean like you should divorce or you should separate. It just means like you need a higher level of structure. So kind of an overall general schema for understanding how to navigate these situations is the worse the break, the more structures needed to heal it. So if I had sprained my wrist, I would need like one of those ace bandages, right? Like
Right.
kind of like that wraps around, and it's going to prevent it from wobbling around, because in order for me to heal, I need structure. I can't just wobble around every which direction and heal. I need that structure. And so, but if a truck ran over my arm, I would need like metal bars and bolts and one of those big casts that wraps around your shoulder or whatever. And my whole arm would be structured. So the structure is corresponding to the break. And that's a good metric. So if there's like severe break, something like I'm talking about, like where there's danger to people, it's like, then you need to take some severe measures. And that could look like separation. That could look like, entering like kind of a rehabilitation program. That could look like, I don't know, like getting other people involved and having conversation as a community about what you should do, not just working this out privately, but involving people that you trust and trying to work this out. Or it can look minor, and there's disagreement about how intense the break is, right? That's going to be totally expected. But I guess you need to decide the structure that you need to heal, because this wasn't just a break in him or her, it's a break in you as well. And the structure that you might need is, you don't have to send me your internet history, but you need to send someone your internet history, and they need to know what's going on. You don't need to tell me every time that you look at porn, but you should be telling somebody that you trust, and maybe that I trust too. Because if you become the manager of their porn habit, that's gonna be terrible. Like, I've seen it over and over.
Right.
Where, like, there's this compulsive, obsessive like management of, okay, well, let me go through your phone, let me go through your text, and let me see, like that's not a structure that actually helps. Maybe there's somebody that's not biased and not emotionally intertwined in that would be an appropriate step to take with someone else. But
Right.
I know I'm giving a lot of isolated examples.
Amplify the betrayal trauma if they're having to be like the accountability partner.
Yeah, absolutely. Because relapse is a part of recovery, and there's going to be times, even when they're committed and even when they have a good plan, that they might relapse, and that's not evidence that they're not taking it seriously. That's just part of recovery. But again, that has to be in the context of a whole plan and other people who are involved in your life and giving advice. It's that would be a big part, maybe, of my advice here is, don't make these decisions just isolated by yourself. Involve people that you trust.
Thanks for sharing. Is there anything that we haven't discussed? I want to leave you with the opportunity to have the last word during this conversation. Is there anything that you'd like to share before we finish?
I think one thing I'd say, for those who are listening, and maybe on both sides of the equation, where you have a partner who's looking at porn, you're looking at porn, there's shame and discouragement, this whole thing feels overwhelming. You are part of one of the first generations of humankind that have had to figure this thing out. Like, just think about that for a second. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans have had to figure out what to do about sexuality. And then here comes a technology that allows you to essentially engage anybody that you want, that looks however you want, or in any situation that you want, any narrative you want to create, and to vicariously experience literally any sexual experience that you can fathom. And basically for free. And with easy access. Like, it is a profound technological shift that is not simple to untangle and to establish yourself. And that moral domain is immensely difficult, especially when you have thousands, maybe tens of thousands of marketers and producers and people who are, their entire goal is to get you hooked. Their entire job, their paycheck is dependent upon making material that will hook you in.
Right.
Give yourself a little bit of grace here, that we don't have a map for how to navigate this thing yet. This is different than Playboy magazines. This is different than, like, when broadband internet hit 2010, the whole domain changed. And so you are pioneering how to figure this out for your kids and their kids and generations onward. You are pioneering how to figure this out for other couples in your community and for other friends. Like, give yourself some grace. This is anything but simple. And so if you're feeling especially discouraged because you've been trying to figure this out for several years, it might take you a long, long time, because there's no roadmap that even comes close to the kind of access, to the kind of variety, to the kind of potency that this drug is imposing on our culture. And it's poison. So be careful and give yourself some grace as you're navigating it, because this is part of living in this time, is one of the burdens that men and women both living in this time have to navigate. So there's a profundity there that's worth keeping in mind.
Yeah. Is there anything that we can do, our listeners and Fight the New Drug can do to support you?
Well, I make a lot of content online. And so if anything that I said was compelling, or if you'd like to follow along with the stuff that I do, Matthias J. Barker is kind of where you can find me. I'm pretty active on TikTok and Instagram. I have a podcast. I do workshops really frequently on these topics more in depth. And so, yeah, that's where you can find me. I'm honored that you take the time, an hour, and just to listen and have a conversation about these deeply personal, deeply meaningful things. So I'm just thankful for the opportunity, man.
Hey listeners, you're invited to the club. Fighter Club, that is. If you're looking for a way to become a more active part of this movement, consider joining Fighter Club. For as little as $10 a month, you can create a real impact by supporting our efforts to educate and raise awareness on the harms of porn. Plus, by joining, you can get insider info, 30% off all Fight the New Drug's conversation starting gear, access to our secret store, and an exclusive Fighter Club kit sent to you when you sign up. Join Fighter Club today at ftnd.org/FC. That's ftnd.org/FC. See you in the club.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of Consider Before Consuming. Consider Before Consuming is brought to you by Fight the New Drug. Fight the New Drug is a non-religious and non-legislative organization that exists to provide individuals the opportunity to make an informed decision regarding pornography by raising awareness on its harmful effects using only science, facts, and personal accounts. If you want to learn more about today's guest and the conversation we had, you can check out the links included with this episode. Again, big thanks to you for listening to this conversation. As you go about your day, we invite you to increase your self-awareness, look both ways, check your blind spots, and consider before consuming.